Let's talk about minimaps. Minimaps come in all shapes and sizes in games, from overhead views, abstract symbols, rotating and static viewpoints, and with many different uses. Now, a minimap has many uses to the player, but the biggest in my opinion is that it provides the player with a visual sense of their surroundings that a normal viewpoint lacks. This is important, as in the real world, we as humans can sense things happening outside our view through our other senses. Games cannot really provide this. Though surround sound and wide field of views do help, they cannot help us feel the air pressure change of a doorway being opened, or the smell of an animal being nearby. Most immediately, minimaps can provide the player with a sense of direction through the use of a static map or a compass. And unless the specific point of your game is to confuse the player, the last thing you want is for them to get turned around or confused about where they are. That said, there are hundreds of different ways to do a minimap, and each one has positives and negatives. I'm going to cover just a few that I drew inspiration from, but realise that nearly every game will implement a minimap differently and have a perfectly valid reason for doing so. First off, let's go back in time a bit and look at the Elder Scrolls Morrowind, made back in 2002. Its minimap is fairly basic, but it provides us a good starting point. This minimap provides a simple overhead view of the player, allowing for the player to see their close surroundings, which is important in a game about exploration. It does not show enemies or accessible areas, but does highlight level doors for the player to see. Another feature is that the map can be turned on or off and resized to show more or less of the surrounding area. As the map is static and shows the direction the player is facing, it does not need a compass, as the top of the map is always going to be north. Now, let's jump forward a decade to the Call of Duty series, which has hardly changed its minimap since Call of Duty 4 in 2007. The most notable difference is that while this map provides an overhead view, all the objects have a transparent grayscale look. From this, you can see where you can move around and the boundaries are clearly defined. Although harder to see, there is also a compass at the top so that cardinal directions, north, south, etc., can be used by the player. This is important as the map rotates as the player moves. The most important aspect is that enemies show up on the screen once they fire a weapon. This alerts the player to their presence if they are close. In a game where fast reactions to enemies is required, this is just an extra layer of visibility for the player. Lastly, let's take a break from the first-person games and look at the RTS game Rise of Nations, where a minimap is used instead to give a player a quick overview of the entire map. Unlike the previous examples, a minimap in an RTS game is used to allow the player to keep track of everything they know. All the structures and troops are shown, along with enemy objects that have also been seen. In the case of Rise of Nations, area of control is very important, so everyone's area is the most prominent feature on the map. Now to talk about what I've been doing. If you saw the last video, you would have already seen the basic minimap in the top right of the screen. In my case, the game is still very early, so I'm unaware of all the features that will make it into the minimap. However, it is clear that having the player know exactly where they are in these fairly maze-like dungeons will be very important. Therefore, the layout and movable area is important to display. I'm still tossing up whether to have the map rotate or to have it still with a player icon that rotates. A static map is much easier to understand where you've been and where you should go next, whereas a rotating map is good for a player following directions or making quick decisions on which way to go. At the moment, the map is rotating, however I suspect it may become static later. This is because long-term navigation is more important than fast decision making in my game. Now let's run through how I actually draw this map. Each frame we draw, we take the camera away from the player's viewpoint and place it high above them. I then draw the dungeon model, however instead of using the normal tileset, it is drawn with a special minimap tileset, which is just a bunch of coloured squares. From this, the image is rendered and stored into a texture. The camera is then placed back at the normal viewpoint and the view is rendered. The texture we saved is then used on the minimap model when it is drawn to the screen. Now, a better implementation of this would be to draw the entire dungeon to a texture and then we just scroll across it as the player moves. This is actually a technique I use for the collision, but I'll talk more about that later. The downside to this is that if I want to place dynamic things like monster symbols or other objects onto the map, it would not really be possible. My current way costs a few extra microseconds during rendering, but when your game is running at 5000 FPS, you don't limit your future decisions like that. Not sure what next week will be, as the collision engine is still under development, so it might be animations next. Thanks for watching!